This is Michael Matheson Miller, and you are listening to the Moral Imagination Podcast. Thank you for joining the Moral Imagination Podcast. I'm delighted today to have as my guest John Johnson. He is the founder of Patmos Technology and also the Magnus Institute, which I'm going to have you talk about. I'm very happy to have John on the show. We met at a conference in Rome last year. It was at the Vatican Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences on artificial intelligence and at the Builders Forum. So I was grateful to be invited to that by Longbeard and to participate in that. And we had a good conversations there. And as John spoke and made a lot of interesting comments, I was like, okay, I need to get John on the podcast. And so it's taken a long time because I'm trying to finish a film on poverty. But I'm finally very delighted to have John join the show. So John, thanks so much for joining the Moral Imagination.
It's a great honor to be here, Michael. Thank you.
So let's begin. Why don't we just start and tell a little bit about your background and how you get into, we're going to talk a lot about artificial intelligence. We're going to talk about the human person. What does it mean to be a person? How do we think about intelligence, consciousness? Now let's talk a little bit about your background. You are a technologist and a theologian, which is rare.
That's I hope theologian's not a protected term. I don't think it is. I don't have a doctorate. I did study at the graduate level philosophy and theology, particularly epistemology of St. Thomas Aquinas. Also realized at some point that I was never cut out to be a serious academic and had a desire to make a living. So I went into tech in the beginning of my professional life. And yeah, now I run Patmos Hosting, which is an AI data center software company that provides what I would call anti-technocratic full stack technology solutions to a lot of people. And it's a very interesting story, very providential. I don't know how I got into what I got into doing, but it's a lot of fun. And with AI, you have a real intersection of two of the things that I was kind of built to do, which is think about the way humans know and protect humans from what I think is a pretty ever-encroaching dominion over us through technocracy. We all kind of feel it in our bones that these four big companies all have the same product. That product is you and me. And we all want to resist it, but we don't really know how. So we do live in interesting times, which is unfortunate in many ways, but here we are.
Great. Well, there's a lot there. I mean, a couple of things that stood out to me, just maybe we could talk about before we get into AI and the person. So I think there's a deep problem with technocracy. And I'm finishing a film really that's about poverty, but it's fundamentally also about the problem of technocracy, the rule by techne, where human beings become really objects of social engineering instead of subjects and protagonists of their own story and agency. And I think that, I said I'm working on this documentary on poverty, and where you see it first is with the poor, right? Because we're always doing social experiments on the poor. But I think and that doesn't mean there haven't been social experiments on everyone else for a long time. But I think what you're seeing now is a real kind of, as you said, encroachment into behavior modification and like technocratic kind of management of people. Tell me a little bit about how you describe your company as an anti-technocratic one.
Our company was born out of a really direct need. And I mean, I was running a consultancy in the 20-teens that our whole business model was just to build websites and then resell hosting services from big tech companies. So we would package them, classic MSP model, managed service provider model, package big tech hosting products, resell them for a markup, manage those services, collect a monthly check. In COVID era, one of our clients who, if you knew the client, and you probably do, was just kind of like a conservative, I guess you would say, Catholic commentator. And we got a legal notice from our hosting company who we were buying from at the time and said, this client has 30 days to get off of our servers because it's a hate group. as defined by the SPLC.
Right.
And I'm like,
Southern
whoa,
Poverty Law Center. They define everybody as a hate group.
a hate
Yeah.
group. That sounds pretty serious. And I thought, like, well, this is really strange. These guys, really, honestly. And then I thought, well, one, why is big tech so threatened by this little message in a relatively small audience? Two, if this is happening to these guys, it's happening to a lot of other companies and nobody really talks about it because it doesn't make the press. Nobody really cares. It's just you get noticed from one of these companies, you're gone. You can't make a living. If you can't exist online and can't have your IP online and you can't charge for that IP, then you can't exist. You're kind of kicked out of the public square. So you remember in the early 2020s when there was like the cancellation purge,
Of course.
but there was a lot going on that just didn't make the papers. A lot of people were being canceled.
Oh, yeah.
But this for me was kind of like this light bulb. I'm just like, I'm going to start my own hosting company where I'll never cancel anybody. It was kind of like the sentiment of a 6-year-old who gets grounded and says, when I grow up, I'm never going to cancel. I'm never going to ground my kids because that's just so mean. But we did it and discovered there was actually a pretty good market for it. So we basically created what we call the Patmos terms and conditions, but it's really it's a customer bill of rights. So it basically says, we can't cancel you for any reason ideologically, whether or not we agree with what you have to say. We don't host pornography, but that's not really based on a moral stance. Obviously, pornography is repugnant, but we don't want to be the arbiters of what's legal and illegal content. So that's kind of our one rule. And you can't do anything illegal. And we have to respond to any lawful notice, but we have to give you notice if we get a lawful subpoena or something like that. So, and we realized that those terms and conditions, the Bill of Rights, basically in our own terms and conditions, protecting our own customers from us, resonated pretty deeply with our customers, and there was a big market for it. So we kind of conquered the cancel-proof hosting market and backed it up by a real verticalized infrastructure. So actually owning our own data centers down to the dirt, our own fiber, and in our company's DNA, we've never raised money from any venture capital source. So we're not owned ourselves. So we have a certain amount of autonomy to protect our customers just by nature of us being bootstrapped, which is really, really an important piece of the puzzle.
Well, very important.
So, and then after that, obviously the AI boom started, and we found out we were pretty good at doing managed co-location, and the rest is history. So grew from 0 to now about 80 employees in 3 years' time.
Fantastic.
Probably one of the only profitable companies in our space, and probably one of the fastest companies in any industry in history to have bootstrapped to the valuation where we are in such a short amount of time.
I love it. It's wonderful. Well, this is something, we're not going to talk about this too much, but in 2021, I was, 2021, I started writing. I just wrote like an essay on how to avoid being kind of canceled but also the problems of surveillance capitalism, of behavior modification. A friend of mine said, well, you should turn it into a little monograph. So I did in 2021, and it's called Digital Contagion. It's right here. I have it, which I didn't think we were going to talk about, but it's, in the third chapter was published by Return magazine, which has been bought by Blaze, but it was called Escape the Botnet. And I went through 10 things that you can do to kind of talk about how you can avoid being canceled. And at that time, really, I was looking around and talking. I was talking to all these people, like, who's doing this? Who's building this? And I didn't know you were building it. But so at the same time, this is why it's better to be an entrepreneur than a philosopher. Okay. Because you actually built something, which is awesome. And I'm so excited that you did that. And, but I did get a lot of positive, like they told me this was one of their most popular pieces. But in that area, one of the things I talked about, and I gave a talk on it, on what I called, like, what I talked about, how we have to build a parallel polis. And I use that term from the Czech dissident Václav Benda, and which I think is really important. There was this sense that we had kind of accepted these major tech companies, some of whom were like virulently opposed to, say, Christian belief or any conservative belief, and you could lose your business. It was a fact. And I think, can you correct me if I'm wrong? I think Alliance Defending Freedom was canceled by Salesforce.
Yeah. I'm not aware of the specifics of that situation, but there were quite a bit of them. We started basically claiming to be the host for the parallel economy.
Yeah, I saw that, because parallel polis is a great concept of. It doesn't mean that you're siege mentality. It means that you're like, you have to build economic and civil a society so that people have the opportunity to flourish. But keep going. I interrupted.
I think that's true. But deep inside of what first happened to Patmos that caused us to be founded, right? And obviously Patmos is the name of the first island of exile where this guy who couldn't be killed, so they tried to silence him. But the island became a place of refuge and amplification. But I think the very threat of cancellation from technocrats betrays them and gives away their weakness. That is, if they really care what you have to say and how you have to operate, then that indicates a certain weakness that they have. If they're really threatened by it, then your voice is actually more strong than even you know. And there's this, I don't know if you ever read The Diary of Saint Maria Faustina, Michael, with
I don't, I've read a little bits of it. I don't think I don't know it well.
There's a line in there that just really compelled me to do what we did. But she's asking Jesus, she sees these visions from our Lord, and she asks him, how do I do this? How do I possibly compete with these forces? And he says to her, take courage, daughter. The world is not as strong as it seems. And that's powerful, because the world is not as strong as it seems. You know, we only have like 4 or 5 data centers. AWS only has like 400 data centers. Well, that's a lot of data centers. It's not that many data centers. So I think that if you play in the field of parallel economy as if it's an alternative to the norm, you're giving too much ground.
No, I agree with that.
Just build the economy that you want your kids to inherit. Carve out a place on the internet where your kids can be free to do business without commodifying or reducing themselves or their data to a transitive object fit for use and then deletion.
Right.
I think we have to act as if rightly ordered culture is normal.
Yeah, no, that's well said. Yeah, I think that's the key. That the thing of the parallel, this is what I was trying to say, it's not a siege, it's not an escape. It's actually a way to actually be involved. And one of the things I wrote about, and then I'm going to move on, was that, you know, what was happening was oftentimes either the government, in certain cases we saw it with COVID, or various tech companies were using like soft digital power. And so they didn't actually, it doesn't have to become public, because like, wait, well, we're just not letting you use our services. There's nothing wrong with that. And in one sense, yeah, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And so what I think happened was that we became overly reliant upon these things, and then it stopped people from talking or stopped people from building things. And so I think the way you articulate it is actually really good. Is it's a parallel economy is really just the normal economy, where people are able to do business, engage in communicative justice, and I think that's exactly the way to think about it. Okay, let's move on, because I want to talk about artificial intelligence. How do you think about this? Let's begin with that. How do you think about artificial intelligence, and what are some of your main concerns?
That's a very big question, but I'll try to break it down. I think the biggest concern I have with the rise of what we call AI is the advent of the counterfeit human person. I think we have a great opportunity, but a great challenge to really clarify what a human person is, what a human person isn't, And it's a great entry point into this discussion of materialism, emergent theories. Like there's a lot of people in team AI who say that a soul can be grown out of complexity. And I think we, if I could speak as a Catholic, have to reject that categorically. I think we have to pay really close attention to what the authors and proponents of AI are telling us they want to do with it. I think we have to listen when Ray Kurzweil says we can create our own God and upload ourselves to that God and be saved. In many ways, the Ray Kurzweil proposition is Eucharistic sounding. That is, create something that you can become one in the flesh with at the level of your firing neurons, and so be saved and live forever. But we also have to have the courage and I think the wisdom to hold that proposition of the modern technocrat in stark opposition to the Catholic Eucharistic proposition, which is unite in the flesh with your Creator and so be saved. And at the end of the day, that's the fork in the road. You have to decide, everybody's going to have to decide whether you unite in the flesh with your creature to be saved or unite in the flesh with your Creator to be saved. There's really no middle ground. I see Catholics very afraid to have that eschatological discussion on the terms of the technocrats that I think we're being called to engage. You see Peter Thiel out there using language of Antichrist. You see Microsoft calling their sales teams evangelists, right? They're using Catholic language, and we are sort of afraid to. At the level of practicality, there's an opportunity. I mean, I'm not going to say that AI is just Malum and say and should be avoided. I think there are valid questions as to what's really going on with AI, what really revealed to us this sort of technology and this sort of knowledge. There are huge questions about the end game. Is AI wicked? Absolutely not, right? Like we use it all the time. This is how I make my living. But like any tool, it has to be ancillary to be good. It has to be useful toward human ends. The second that tool begins to replace human ends or stand in place of those human ends in the name of convenience, the second the human person or the human body becomes reducible to something that's transitive, we have lost. And so like any impressive technology, like any tool, it has to be used for a transcendent purpose, but it can't become the transcendent end in itself, or we're cooked. So I think that's kind of to try to make something out of your very big question. That's what I would start with. What's really at stake? What's the intended telos from the words of its creator of this technology? And then, like any technology that's come before it, how do we make the best of it in a way that doesn't subordinate ourselves to it? Because every technology, there's a temptation to subordinate ourselves to the tool.
Yeah, exactly. So like I have a couple follow-ups, but I think on that technology subordinating us to tool, you and I talked about this. One thing that was very interesting at that conference at the Pontifical Academy of Social Science in the Vatican, and I learned a lot. It was very good. But one thing that struck me as I thought about it, the way everybody began to talk about the human person was through consciousness. And like, so I do a lot of lecturing on what does it mean to be a human person. I think about these questions a lot. And, I've talked, and listeners know this, I've talked about like there's like 5 false anthropologies that are, to use your language, counterfeit visions of the human person, right? So we're either a cog or a scourge or plastic, and I think one of them is transhumanism, which is connected to artificial intelligence, of combining ourselves with technology to create a new kind of thing, and another one is just commodification. We are just a thing to be commodified. So I think we're inundated with false anthropologies, but one of the things I'm worried about is how even now among Catholics, we start talking about the human being as conscious and what's consciousness, and is AI going to become conscious? But if I start thinking about anthropology, I say, well, what is a human being? Well, it's a embodied person created in the image of God with reason and freedom and a social nature, again, embodied, and with spiritual emotions. And what's an individual substance of a rational nature. We don't start with consciousness. And yet already with AI and digital technology, it's like we're interpreting ourselves through the creature, right? So like we're both using analogies, and that makes sense. We think of like mechanistic analogies of the human person, but the human person is a mechanistic interpretation of the human person is an error.
That's right.
And a consciousness-based computer analogy is an error, as much as an error as it would be to say, I'm going to compare you to a copy machine, right? John, your ink is running low today. All right. I mean, that gets absurd, but what actually happens, that's my new way. I'm going to compare everybody to a copy machine, right? It's like, oh, the magenta's off in you. The paper loader, your paper loader, did you not have your paper loaded correctly? Yeah, I didn't have my coffee. But we do that with technology, and it seeps in. And so that's, I think, is like one of my first concerns. I have many, is that already I see serious Catholic thinkers who I like, and I think if I push them on this, I'm not trying to be proud, but like we just immediately go to like the computer metaphor. What do you think? Do you think I'm wrong? How should we think about that?
That's really astute. Consciousness is a really new word. It's not a particularly Catholic word. That doesn't mean it's a bad word. That doesn't mean it can't become a really good Catholic word once we get some flesh around it. But it's really a Cartesian thing. That is, the personality is constituted by self-awareness and nothing more or nothing other. If you go back to Aquinas, especially on the unicity of the intellect, which is, I think, a really pertinent text, he starts by explaining how the soul is the first act of the body and the person. That is, the soul grows the body. It's not a part. It's not a ghost in a machine. Right. It's not this materialistic reduction of componentry that can generate this thing that is the human person. In other words, it can't be faked. The soul is the animating principle of that which it grows, and everything on my body that you can see and sense. My fingers reach out to know reality. It's all directed toward my intellect and ultimately my passive intellect. And so you're right. That was kind of one of the red flags of trying to start with consciousness, which there might be merit to that if you want to sort of engage this conversation on secular terms. I'm not opposed to that. What scared me more, I think, is jumping into the practicalities. So the worst thing we can possibly do is say, hey, this is a new technology and it's just like the printing press. And Catholics used to be afraid of the printing press, but now we're not. So let's just launch 1,000 ships and go build this thing, whatever it is, but make it Catholic. That's a problem for me, because we have to really understand what the anthropological and like I said, eschatological implications of the technology are. To give you an example, we're all hyped up on AI, as if there is such a thing as artificial intelligence, properly speaking.
Right.
And we're saying, well, let's just make it Catholic AI. So let's build these chatbots, but make sure they're fed by Catholic data. Imagine if to make a little analogy here, imagine if I said, hey guys, conjugal love robots are going to be just a thing for everybody in the next few years. Everybody's going to have a conjugal love robot. Let's make ourselves a Catholic conjugal love robot. So it'll be trained on all the social teaching of the Catholic Church. It'll be totally faithful to you. It'll understand all sexual morality. So it'll be a love robot, but it's Catholic. TM. That would obviously be ridiculous, right?
Absurd.
It would be like absurd. Like, don't go down that road. Well, why are we so eager to do that when it comes to Catholic chatbot? When it comes to Catholic conversation, Catholic education. In other words, I fear we're giving away this premise that is a machine can educate. It can't. Or that a machine can do art. It can't. Or a machine can do theology. It can't. It can't. And we're actually robbing ourselves of our own patrimony. There's a real important principle of any donative action. That is, any action where something's being given. Any act of love, any act of service, any act of education, any act of art. And that is, the one giving is doing something greater than the one receiving. This is directly out of the book of Hebrews, right? It's greater to give than to receive. Well, as soon as you put the giving in some transitive machine's hands and give away that agency, you're robbing the act of all of its goodness. In other words, it's much better for a human to convert a human to the one true faith or something like this. A machine can't do that, but even if it could, you would have stripped the act of its goodness. And so I think we have to be really, really careful about launching into quote unquote Catholic AI, because it takes something that is a tool and attempts to give it human purposes. And there's no nobility in that. Doesn't mean it can't be useful, can't be a good, librarian's card catalog, a good database. We use it all the time. But we have to be really, really careful about carving out what humans do versus what tools do. Those are different things.
All right, I want to ask you some questions about that. One comment I think is really important, and consciousness. John Paul II, Karol Wojtyła, talks about interiority. And interiority is part of our rational nature, which is like a self-awareness. I think you also made another important point that there's a certain sense of like, of that which you are self-aware is like, who is your personality, and you're kind of aware. Ian McGilchrist in his book, Master and His Emissary, does, I think, a very good job at making this point. I mean, there's so much of us that we're not fundamentally aware of at the moment. We're not consciously aware of, and you wouldn't say that's not who we are. So I think there's another area, and that's, I think, in a minute can take us into intuition and connatural knowing and other kinds of experience. But the other thing I would say, so I'm gonna ask you some devil's advocate questions here in a second. But I think the other thing I would add, I thought you maybe even going this way, when you talked about AI, we have Catholic AI. What are we giving away? And I think one of the things we're giving away is our body. And what I mean by that is, so St. Thomas Aquinas says, I am not my soul. So there's three kinds of persons, right? There's divine persons, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. There's angelic persons, and there's us, human persons, which are embodied persons. And we get our bodies back at the end, right? Our bodies aren't accidents, right? We're not driving around our body like a car, as my listeners know, I repeat over and over again. We're not, our body, it's not like the real us inside of ourselves. I mean, I thought the way you talked about the soul is exactly right. Like that the soul is not a part of us. But so I think one of the things is that the reason we're thinking this way is all of us, and it's very difficult, all of us are influenced by this disembodiment and disembodied intelligence. And so that's where I thought we're gonna go, is that, and I think then you go, like when you were talking about the teacher and everything, but then you go back to the donative act. And I think it's embodied. The other thing that's really important, and feel free to like disagree or comment or whatever, is our social nature is so that we're embodied. And I say we're embodied, embedded persons. We're embedded in culture, in our biology, in culture, in our relationships. We have a social nature, and that's fundamental to our personhood. And an artificial intelligence, a algorithm, and maybe I would like to kind of think about this, and you're a technologist, but like it's an algorithm, like a large language model. There's multiple kinds of what we mean by artificial intelligence, right? It doesn't have a social nature. It's not embodied, and it's a creature of our intellect. And so, I mean, that seems to me the other big problem is like, not only do we begin with consciousness, it's almost like the disembodied self. We're playing in the field, right? If it's a game, we're in the away team with disembodied selves. But I'm like, no, I don't have a disembodied self. I'm not my soul. I'm an embodied person. How do you respond to that and in how it shapes our thinking of AI?
I think that's spot on. And ever since this became really apparent with the advent of social media, but we've developed algorithms to farm out our agency, to take away our agency, to manipulate us in the name of convenience. And so now we basically have a situation where our bodies are even becoming transitive in the eyes of the technocrats. You know, you go to Whole Foods.
Explain that. Why don't you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, if you've ever been to Whole Foods lately, I don't know how it is in Michigan, but in California, Whole Foods, you can pay for your groceries with your hand. You can literally scan your hand to buy things. And I wonder what they say if you try that and you are declined. They say you are declined, right? It's not your card anymore. It's you. That is, you've been reduced to something transitive. And you've forsaken that transcendent dignity in the name of convenience. I guess it's easier to swipe your hand than to pull out your credit card. But that really is compounded on so many levels with the way we interface with AI, the way we interface with advertising, social media. You can be having a conversation among friends about running shoes and open up Instagram 5 minutes later, and you're going to get 5 ads for running shoes. And so
it's not listening to you. Trust me, it's not. Okay, you made that up. It's never happened to you.
Oh yeah, never happened.
No,
to me.
it's not true. No, it's
crazy.
not true. You're a conspiracy theorist.
Right. But at the same time, what's dangerous is we actually kind of appreciate it. We're like, wow, I was just talking about those running shoes and now I can just buy them with a few easy clicks. And let me unlock my phone with my face scan or my thumbprint. So the technocrats have really done a great job of pulling in our body into the equation. So I think you were pretty astute to point that out, because it always has to go through the body. That's where our agency is given or forsaken. And so, but that's just really a slow walk. And I think in many ways, not so slow of a walk toward the project of singularity or microchipping, whatever it is. And it's okay to talk about that. We don't have to worry about sounding like kooks for being a little bit afraid of having a microchip required to do commerce. Of course, it's in Revelation pretty explicitly. What's the other thing in Revelation is that the beast is an artifact that's given the power. In many ways, it resembles the lamb, right? It's indistinguishable. They both have mortal wounds from which they recovered. They both have all these heads and diadems. They both demand worship. They both perform signs and wonders. But the beast also demands your flesh. The lamb demands your flesh in a different way. But we think we'll just be able to tell the difference between the beast and the lamb. And we can't. Most can't. Most couldn't tell what Judas was up to in the upper room. Only John saw it. Everybody else is like, oh, yeah, this is great for the poor. And I hear way too much of that in the church around AI. It's like, oh, think about, you were at the conference, right? It's like, we won't have to write our homilies anymore, and we won't need parish secretaries anymore, and the poor will have access to this, this, and this. It's really dangerous stuff, because what's the cost? It's our agency, it's our bodies, it's outsourcing a lot of properly human things through which we are saved, namely our intellect.
You stopped your sentence, so I want you to finish it so that listeners can. You said the artifact, the beast, is given the power of speech, right?
Oh yeah, thanks.
So can
the artifact is even given the power of speech, which does sound a lot like creating this golem, Frankenstein, whatever you want to call it, that we worship, right? And that's been an attempt of humanity since the beginning, especially through forbidden knowledge that's really made explicit in the Genesis narrative, right? Building the Tower of Babel,
Right.
basically getting there on your own power, building it without Daddy God in the room to tell you what to do and how to build it, to build it on your own terms. So that's a tale as old as time. But when Revelation is pretty clear that there will be a time when the beast is born of human hands and is given the power of speech, you have an artifact speaking. Well, it looks a little bit too much like what we've created in AI to ignore that correlation. And I think we're a little bit afraid to as Catholics for fear of sounding reactionary or Luddite or Protestant.
All right, I'm going to come back to that in a second, but I want to make a couple of points that you say. So one is, I think I got this line from James Poulos, but I stole it. And I use it a lot. And that is, the Tower of Babel is now man himself. And this is, I think, something very important, especially with the concept of singularity, which I want you to go into. But the idea of uploading yourselves, right? It's aspirational that we're going to upload ourselves. But it is this idea, if you look at the transhumanist movement, and I've given talks on this, that the transhumanist movement is that we are going to combine biology with technology to create a new kind of human person, a new kind of being. And part of it's an evolutionary model, right? I mean, you know this well. There's an evolutionary model that, well, we emerged out of the dust. We emerged out of, cosmic dust, and we became conscious. And we're just a bundle of materialist neurons, matter. So, that's going to happen to AI, and then we're going to combine and we're going to create a new kind of thing. So this stuff is, I mean, the reason I think you're touching upon this, and maybe if listeners are unaware, like these ideas that you're touching upon are explicit in some of the like kind of the techno utopians, people like Ray Kurzweil, who you brought up. The other thing I want to just note is,
can I touch on that real quick?
Yeah, can I say one quick thing just to give
Sure.
you another? The other thing I just want, before I forget, so Joseph Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, also talks about the golem and this idea that's come out of like Kabbalist tradition, but that this idea that the human person is going to try to create the man. And if the human can create the man, now you don't need God, right? So this is my point is, Benedict XVI has written about the very things you're talking about in the golem. And so it's not as if you're just kind of like getting stuff from the internet. I just wanted to back that up.
That's 100% right. And I think we should listen. God has a sense of humor sometimes when he gives us this kid named Altman, who is explicitly attempting to create the alternate man. And we're just going about our day. Oh, this is a useful product. We should really listen to the signs of the times, I think. And I think if you talk about transhumanism, you have to notice its prequel, which is transgenderism. And this is not an attempt to kick any person in the ribs. We've all got friends. We all love people completely and particularly. But there had to have been a movement to transcend gender itself, but that's only a warm-up act to the movement of transcending the species itself, right? This is a problem with Darwinian materialism, is that if there's really this constant evolution of there's no species in the first place, right? Our kids are slightly more the next thing than we were, and their kids will be slightly more the next thing. So in that sense, the historicity, the Hegelian motion of history, well, what are we becoming? If you ask the typical Silicon Valley technocrat, you're going to get an answer like, we're going to transcend ourselves through our own means. We're going to be able to upload ourselves to the cloud or whatever and live forever in something that we created. Well, the problem is, while we are Capax University, that is, we're capable of forever, and we know it, so we're always going to be reaching for that.
Right.
We're not eternal. We didn't start in forever. We just get to end there. And so
we're everlasting.
We're everlasting. That's right. So our reach in that sense for eternality is always going to extend our grasp, which is why and maybe this would be a great segue into the way the human intellect actually works as the mode of our beatitude, specifically in the passive intellect, which is why the happiness that we seek, the beatitude that we seek and long for, can only be accomplished donatively. It has to be given to us. We can receive it, which is why heaven exists in the passive intellect. There's faculties of the human soul, what makes us human. You had a pretty darn good definition. I think it was something like the an individual composite substance of rational nature. That's great.
It's not my, no, I didn't invent it.
Well,
kidding.
I
No,
mean,
I
it's
know.
like the angelic definition, and you
Yeah.
add a qualifier of composite or embodied, as you did. That's great, but really, what constitutes the human personality is the faculty of the intellect and its appetite, which we call the will. And the faculty of the intellect has two components. And I think, this is a great time to get into high medieval scholasticism. This is a great time to crack open some books from the 13th century, because the way that the human knows, one, thankfully, the Sam Altman hasn't read this apparently, or he'd probably be a lot closer to singularity or AGI, right? I get a good chuckle when I hear Sam Altman and his engineer buddies saying, we're almost there with AGI. It's like watching the world's greatest lawyers perform open heart surgery. It's like you guys you don't know what it is to know, thankfully, right? But for a human in his intellectual capacity, there's two dimensions that are worth noting. The only two, really. There's what Aquinas calls a ratio, which is that discursive, think through it, figure it out, calculative, deduce. And then there's the intellectus, which the best English word for this, I guess, would be intuition. And the Easterns might call it something like nous.
Mm-hmm.
But it's basically the passive intellect where we just get it. It's like you see a beautiful sunset or read a beautiful poem, and it's where wonder lives.
It's con-natural knowing. You just know something because you share a nature.
Exactly. It's con-natural with the whole of reality.
Mm-hmm.
But then down the chain of the faculties and the powers of the soul, there's something called the passions. And the passions are kind of where the rubber meets the road. Is why the body's so important. It's all knowledge comes through the senses. That is, we have to be affected by reality before we can really know it. But what happens in beatific knowledge, namely heaven, the sight of God in his essence, which we're not capable of, that knowledge has to be conveyed through, just like all knowledge has to come through the passions. Knowledge of God in his essence has to come through his passion. So there is a real strong connection between Calvary as a supplement to our epistemological activity at the beatific level. That is, he has to be affected to grant that sort of access to his own interior life. At the end of the day, passion is where the rubber meets the road. Like I said, you don't know anything apart from your passions. But with God, who is impassible by nature, his passion has to be given to us to access the highest sort of knowledge. But to think about it in AI terms, you can maybe check a box of ratio. Like this thing can sort of abstract. It can pull words. It's a word calculator, right? It can process, but it can't will, which means it can't love, and it can't ultimately intuit. It simply can't, and it never will be able to. It will get really darn good at faking those two things. But ultimately, this is why, how do you tell the difference between the beast and the lamb? How do you tell that Judas is up to no good when at Bethany, he's like, I'm going to, this should all be given to the poor. And all the other 10 apostles are like, yeah, he's right. This should be given to the poor. Good point, Judas. Right? So that is, the outward signs are identical. Even when he's betraying our Lord at the Last Supper, everybody assumes he's going to give something to the poor. He's going to do this transitive good. But the beloved knows that that activity is devoid of love itself. And therein he spots the counterfeit. If Catholics only think of artificial intelligence as the means to all these transitive goods, without ever realizing the very merit in any transitive good itself is principally constituted by the love that animates that action, then we will go the way of the beast. It's as simple as that. We will be begging in the name of convenience to be one with our creature and so be saved, and in doing so forsake our Creator. And that's why the book of Revelation really lays it down and says, if you take this mark, it'd be better for you to say no and go by the sword. And if they line up your family and they go by the sword, it'd be better for them than to take this mark. Because as soon as you accept the premise that I and my body and all of its transcendent dignity is reducible to the groceries that I can buy with it at Whole Foods, that I am but a piece of data that's fit for use and ultimately deletion, then you have forsaken your birthright. And I think that's the fast track that we're on as a culture. And I think far too few people, especially in Catholic circles and the Catholic intelligentsia, are willing to stop and ask where we're going.
Okay, that's deep stuff. So I've got a couple of comments and then some questions for you. I think one thing that's very important, again, is the body. So I'm going to go through some of you. So you said a lot, so I'm going to go through. Again, the body is very important. So, you talked about transgenderism and transhumanism, and I've talked about this on the podcast, that in one sense, it's a subset. Transgenderism is a subset of transhumanism. The other thing that's very troubling about this is, or that's very difficult, is that, and again, this is with mercy and kindness to people who suffer. We be very clear about that. There's a lot of, and in fact, social media, psyops, propaganda is causing a lot of this. Okay. And so there's a lot of injustice that's around. So this is not a critique of a person, but what I think happens, it's very interesting, that's connected to the body, is that if a boy decides he's a girl or a girl decides she's a boy inside, okay. Now think about this for just a minute. The young girl knows she's not a boy. Like there's something that she knows interiorly, and the boy, but she's not a girl. And so think about this as far as like in a theological way. What is every boy but a son of the living God? What is every girl but a daughter of the living God? And what transgenderism is it removes your divine sonship and divine daughterhood. It doesn't actually do it. Okay. You're still a daughter or son of God. Let's be clear.
It renounces it.
But it takes it away. So it isolates the person. It says that you don't have, you've lost divine filiation. And this is of many reasons. This is one of the reasons why it's so deeply harmful to people, is because it's this core ontological reality that you are indeed a son or daughter of God. Now, again, it doesn't change it. You can't erase the fact that you're a son or daughter of God, but at least psychologically for the person, they're like floating with nothing. And this is this is one of the reasons why it's so deeply problematic, but it's also connected, I think, you feel free to disagree with me, to this, in a sense, transhumanist aspect, which is that we are going to become, we are going to make a name for ourselves, right? The new Tower of Babel is man himself. We're going to build bricks and go to heaven. We don't need God. It's a rejection of God. And what happens then to the person is they then become in a sense, ready to be commodified, whether they will it or not. And so I think this is uh, something that we have to like take seriously about the on. So I think there's three things that are debates that are taking place. There's the anthropological debate. What does it mean to be a person? There's metaphysical debate. Okay, sometimes the thing does that. There's metaphysical debate, right? And there's an eschatological debate. Like, where are we going? What is the end? How do we think about these things? And I think that this is a lot of the techno-optimistic AI technocracy is an eschatological problem. Right? It's not a technical problem. It's a theological problem of what's the end. So I think those things are very important. What I'd like to do, though, is push you a little bit and ask two realms of questions. One is Eliezer Yudikowsky, who's a materialist, right? He has a book called "If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies." And part of his point is that at some point, this superintelligence is going to be too much for us and we're not going to be able to handle it. And he says, we're not paying attention to that. And we're just being like kind of lazy, not lazy, we're just being kind of like, oh, but it doesn't matter. It's going to be fine. And we'll all solve it when it gets there. And I don't want to go deep into his argument, but he makes a point that there will appear a kind of willing or wanting. Right. And he gives an example of a program that had an assignment to go get some data. And what happened is there was an accident and one of the servers was turned off. And it wasn't programmed to do this, but it figured out a way to turn on the server, solve the problem, and get the thing, and then kind of solve this whole problem very quickly. I'm not going into the details on purpose. But his point was it actually went beyond what people thought it was going to do. There was some kind of wanting that's going on. Now, I don't know if he's fully arguing that it's going to be that way or not. I mean, he's a materialist, so I think he may at some point get there. But his, I think, larger point is whether it actually is wanting or not, it's going to have these apparent attributes. And then Max Tegmark, who was actually at that conference where we were, he says, who cares whether AI is conscious if it's shooting at you? And so these are like, in a sense, like, so the question is like, there's a theological, well, it's not really wanting, or it's not really have consciousness, but the robot's having a gun shooting at you. And this goes to the second level, which is, I want to both push you on this and go deeper, is that, I think, and I don't want to kind of like discount your words, because I think you're saying strong things that you mean. But I think there's another element of when you put your hand for the Whole Foods or your thumbprint or your face, and none of which I do, by the way, I just won't do it. I mean, it probably doesn't matter. They have all my data anyways. And they do it at the airlines. So with no choice, like, right. So, but I'm like, I'm not doing that. I don't want to do it. But I think like, it's not as if, and feel free to disagree with me, it's not as if this is a sin for you and you've accepted the mark of the beast. What I think you're saying, and correct me if I'm too soft, is that we are slowly accepting certain things for convenience that are continually commodifying, devaluing ourselves, our bodies, and our persons, so that we are simply a product. And like Shoshana Zuboff is good on this, and Jaron Lanier is good on this, and neither of them are, I think, I know Jaron's not a Christian. I don't think Shoshana Zuboff is either. They're not. I don't think they're religious, but they're aware, like, we are slowly giving ourselves over to be psyop, to be behavior modified, and to be commodified. And so there's like just on the natural level, and then there's the supernatural level of how that connects to the beast. Do you want to develop that or push back or what?
Sure. No, I think that's fair. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say I'd rather watch my kids be martyred than have to buy an apple with my hand at Whole Foods. But I might go so far as to ask Whole Foods what I can get with 2 middle fingers instead of a whole hand. In other words, there's a certain sort of rebelliousness that I think is called for when they push too far on the body. And you're right. We are the frog in the pot of water that's slowly boiling. Little by little, there's an encroachment on our flesh that we have to be aware of. Where that line is a matter of prudence that you can determine for yourself. But I think it's definitely, for me, it would be obvious that something like a microchip or an RFID imprint, basically this union that permits commerce, would be gravely, gravely wrong. Um,
So I think you're,
there's,
so let me
yeah,
say you're in sense like again I'm asking you questions like this is what I'm at,
yeah,
like
yeah,
I would say like it seems as if I'm listening to you, you're supposed both speaking analogically, like as an analogy, like you don't want to be doing these things. And notice the book of Revelation is warning us about these things. And
correct.
I think you're also speaking actually, right? So that maybe some
Yeah,
people will say, oh, I can't hear John because he's he's just believes in the rapture, and you're like, no, read the
no, I don't.
Revelation.
Yeah.
But I know you don't. But the second part is that there's both I think there's both an analogical, like an analogy, like you better be careful, like Revelation is not simply just about the actual end times, it's also about how, like,
It's
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 paying
about
attention.
it's about the now times, and it
Yeah,
always
so
has
walk
been.
through that so that people can hear that, because I think I'm hearing you. I think some people would think, oh well, he just thinks it's the end times, it's the mark of the beast, and it's just your waving your hand at Whole Foods.
No, 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 no. We know everything in the Old Testament points to Christ. Everything in the New Testament points back to Christ. But it's also true that everything in the New Covenant, that is the here and now in the last 2,000 years of history, points back to Christ. That is, there's a typology in history itself. So when Peter brings out his sword in the garden and strikes Malchus's ear off, and then Jesus says, "Put your sword away," we have this really beautiful parallel in the history of the papacy launching crusades and going to war, and then putting the sword back, right? And there's countless examples of this in the life of our Lord that is sort of reflected in history henceforth to now. In Revelation, when St. John tells us of a woman who goes to the desert and is about to be devoured by a dragon, well, is he talking about Eve? Yes. Is he talking about Our Lady's flight to Egypt? Yes. Is he talking about the church militant now here? Yes. So there's a multidimensionality to what I would call the sacramentality of history, that really there's many layers to the onion. So when we read the book of Revelation, we shouldn't just be thinking about this stuff that's going to happen in the future, but stuff that's happening now, stuff that has happened, because it's the story of the nascent church uh, being born into the church triumphant. Um, to your point on Udikowski, he is a sensationalist.
Yep.
Maybe. I don't think he would call himself that. He's a little bit hyperbolic. Um, Part of me hopes he's right, that if we build it, we all die. That sounds like a nice way to go out. But he's also a
That
materialist.
makes one of us.
Yeah, right, right. He's also a materialist.
Right,
Um,
right.
and he's not really rooted in, I think, the most important questions. To your point about renouncing the birthright and transgenderism as a prequel to transhumanism, which it very much is, I would invite you and your listeners to zoom in on the prodigal son account in Luke's gospel. And if you read it with the Greek concordance, it's a very beautiful and pertinent thing. But the son goes to the father, the prodigal son goes to the father and says, "Father, give me a share in your inheritance." The Greek word there is ousios, which means substance, the invisible animating principle of this father's life. And the son saw all the stuff that the father had. He saw all the transitive goods, all the signs of life. He saw the produce and the farm animals and the estate and the family, and says, "I want that. And it's basically mine by my birthright." And he was right. He says, "Father, give me a share of your ousios." The father then gives him a share of the stuff, but Luke changes the Greek word there. And so the son comes away with not a share of the ousios, but a share of the bion, which is like bios, the
Like
visible
the matter,
sign,
the stuff.
the stuff. So the son gets a share, what he thinks is a share in the ousios, but he only comes away with the stuff, the bion, the matter. And of course, we know how the story goes. He goes out and he squanders it and realizes that he is depleted because he doesn't have the spiritual animating principle, the invisible principle of all this stuff. He repents and goes back to his father and realizes that he's had the ousios all along. And so much of the pursuit of modern man is a mirror image of that. Insofar as we're trying to self-generate our own ousios to get the bion, because all we see is the stuff, and we want more stuff, and we want poor people to have stuff, and we want an abundance of stuff. And we're not thinking about the invisible things. We're not thinking about the ousios. We're not thinking about the stuff that makes the stuff. And I think AI is, sure, let's have a lot of stuff, and we'll have a lot of stuff without a lot of effort. But if you start to divorce the stuff from the spiritual animating principle that generates that stuff, we're in for a world of hurt.
You know, it's interesting. So there's a book called Abundance out. Everybody's talking about abundance, different things. One of the things that's central in, I think, the problem with the way we deal with poverty, and I did this in our film that we did, Poverty Inc. for 10 years ago, and in our new film that we're working on, is that we've substituted caritas, charity, which is love, for humanitarianism, which is essentially a limited horizon to provide material comfort, but
That's
we
right.
miss the fundamental need that poor people have. So I think that's important.
Which is why poor people tend to be happier. You go down to Tijuana and you spend time with a poor family and they kill their last chicken and they're just happy. Whereas we're sitting here, you know, multi-millionaires and everything, and it's like, it's never enough. Money doesn't make you happy. Anybody who's been rich knows that. We get more delight out of ordering the Amazon package than we do from getting it and opening it, and you see it and you're like, oh, that kind of sucks. What's the next thing I can buy? Gregory says it really, Pope Gregory the Great says it beautifully. He says that the material things cause in us a joy before we have them and a disgust once we get them. Spiritual things cause in us a disgust before we have them, but once we have them, we have a joy and a longing for more.
Interesting. Yeah,
and so it's
Where
really
does he say that?
dangerous.
Do you know?
What's that?
Where does he say that? Do you know? I like that.
It's in one of his homilies, one of his gospel homilies. There's a book called 33 Gospel Homilies.
Let's talk about a little bit more on artificial intelligence. So just very, I want to talk to you about behavior modification. But one of the things you've mentioned a couple of times, and I think most listeners are going to follow this, but you've mentioned AGI, which is, you know, artificial general intelligence. One of the things, what might be helpful. So you're a technologist, you own a technology company, you do AI. If you were going to explain to somebody what's AI, and why should I not call it AI? Like, what would you call, say, a large language model or different types of artificial intelligence? And then how does that distinguish from the goal of artificial general intelligence? Can you just walk through that, I think, really quickly? Because I think you've mentioned it a couple of times. Explain, like, what is actually taking place, and then what are the aspirations with artificial general intelligence, and what do you think is going to happen there?
At one level, what is taking place is verbal graphical calculators. So it's a probability engine that basically deduces which is the most likely next word to be spit out based on all the data that it's trained on.
It's like the gradient descent, is that what it's called? Like something, is that right?
Exactly.
Or is that
yeah.
different? Okay.
Right. At the level of the neural network, if you ask the best technologists who are most deeply in the weeds on programming this stuff, they have no idea. They have no idea how it really, really works.
Yudkowsky says that too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's scary. That's scary. So as far as what else I would call it, I think artificial, as long as like that artificial part is italicized, it's not a bad term for it. I think in its best use, in its good use, if there is one, then we have to be really clear about its ancillary nature, like ancillary verbal processing. It's a verbal processing engine. It's like a really cool word calculator. It's not a teacher. It's not an artist. It sure as hell isn't a friend. It's not a spiritual guide. It's not a companion. I don't want to talk to your Saint Anthony AI chatbot unless he can find my keys for me, and I don't think he can.
If
Right?
he can, man, that's maybe you start waving your hand on that one.
Maybe the day is coming when he can. In which case, I have other questions. Um, but Catholics especially have to be really careful in what they build. Okay, and they can't attempt to build a replacement intelligence any more than we should be attempting to build a replacement love vessel, to use my earlier analogy, right? They're both equally dangerous. But if we understand that it's ancillary, it's like a research tool, it's a word calculator, go for it. I use it all the time for those reasons. Now, how you condition yourself when you're using it is pretty dicey, right? Like, you ever notice
No, yeah.
you say please and thank you to your AI? Well, I don't. But then I find myself talking to the AI like, Miyagi telling Karate Kid to paint the fence again, 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 again. And you have to be careful that when you step out of that, that's not how you start
Right.
interacting with real humans, right? So
You
it's
and
a
I talked about
double-edged
this
sword.
2 years ago or a year ago, is that
Absolutely.
in some ways, should you say please to the, I don't want to say please, but in other ways, I got to make sure I don't talk to other people like I talk to the AI.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, because it has that personal feeling to it and you want to cultivate politeness. Then the next thing you know, you're treating AI as if it's a person. And now you've got these chats. And I think this is maybe what I ask you. Like, I'm very worried. I mean, a lot of people are. I'm worried about people who are, all of us are very vulnerable and very fragile, but more fragile, young people having friendships with the AI, talking to the AI. I mean, we already have the very well-known story that AI told some boy to commit suicide. I'm also worried about behavior modification. I mean, Jaron Lanier is really good on this. I had Jaron Lanier on the podcast years ago, and that we're already seeing in social media with the internet a lot of behavior modification. What's his name? BJ Fogg or something has this, persuasive design lab out of Stanford. All the things, the like buttons, all the things that, we've been seeing, Instagram, it's things sent to you. AI takes this because it's a very powerful verbal calculator and algorithms, takes this to the next level. And it knows, quote unquote, who you are, how old you are, what your weaknesses are. It can really start to be used as a tool for propaganda and behavior modification. I'm very worried about that. What do you think? Am I wrong to worry about that or what?
100%. I'm worried about that. I'm also worried about the centralization of data.
Huge. Me too.
Yeah. From what I see in the industry, there's really three components that are causing the massive commercial rise in AI. And that's a limitation of supply on three things, right? It's hardware, it's electricity, and it's data. But what people don't talk about enough is that the most limited of those three is by far data. We simply don't have enough data to train the biggest models comprehensively. And so
I'm worried about giving Catholics giving all their data away.
I'm very worried about that.
Including the Catholic Church.
I'm very worried about that. There's a reason that Christopher Nolan is so opposed to streaming videos, right? He wants you to own a physical Blu-ray because once something is in the cloud and under the control of the few, it can be edited, deleted, augmented, maybe. But it's not safe. So I think, not to say I'm opposed to, the code of canon law being on the internet, right? Like,
no, of course, that's not. Yeah.
It's okay to transcribe stuff and digitize stuff, but we have to be really, really careful that non-digital copies remain and that the locations of our uploads is in friendly hands. And it's just not these days if it's on a large language model.
Can I ask you about this? Is like, maybe this is off topic and we can talk about it later, but like this, do you think, I sometimes think this is where distributed ledger technology can be really important, that it's actually in a distributed ledger as opposed to centralized.
It could,
but does that actually, I mean, obviously you need non-digitized copies for sure, but does the decentralized ledger at least prevent give an obstacle towards the centralization and the deletion or changing, et cetera?
I would hope so. I would hope, it's partly above my pay grade, but yeah, I would hope there's answers on the blockchain and decentralization for data. But I don't think about it too much. I'm just kind of worried about uploading it in the first place. If Sam Altman says, sure, you can use our GPUs, just give us some of that data, I'd be really wary of that transaction, right? And that's
Explain that.
kind of
What do you mean? Explain that.
Well, a lot of people, I think, building these models are basically Chat GPT RAG layers on top of Chat GPT and building their own bots on top of big tech base layers. I think there's this sort of strange bedfellow transaction afoot where there's, you need the resources, you need the compute resources to train your models, and you're Catholic. Big tech needs the data, and you're Catholic, so they make a trade, right? Sure, use our machines, just give us your data to train on. I think that's a bargain that we shouldn't try to make.
Why?
Well, what do they want with it? Why would you give your precious armory? Why would you give the treasury of your patrimony to entities that have expressly willed your destruction?
I mean, so some people would say, come on, I mean, you're just being like, what's wrong with it? It's just data. We're just sharing our data. It's going to get into the hands of more people. More people
Yeah,
are going
this
to learn
is
about the
super
Catholic
dangerous.
faith.
I've heard the same people say things actually like, we need to evangelize these models, and the models need to feed on all of this richness in the Catholic patrimony so that they can be converted. Like, actually, in all seriousness, I've heard a lot of people say that, and it terrifies me because you can't convert something that can't love. So I would avoid it. And I think that's, the Patmos play is to really develop a lot of this infrastructure in a verticalized fashion. So we actually own our data centers. We own a lot of the fiber. We own machines, but at least there it's kind of controllable and not beholden to technocratic powers. So, but there's no like right way playbook to really think about this stuff. It's uncharted territory. I don't blame anybody who's trying it in a certain way. And I know just about everybody I've met who's doing it is really well intentioned and wants the best, and they're good men. So I would just be really, really careful about who we do deals with.
Yeah. Okay. So just one more thing on just the behavior modification. This this worry, is it? I mean, it seems to me that AI, I'm just kind of repeating this question, really takes this to it's much more difficult to resist behavior modification. You're almost unaware that it's happening to you. I mean, I think we've already seen that with social media. Um, but with the power of computing, with say, Chat GPT 5 and all, like, again, this is the technologies above my pay grade, that the power of computing really makes it even more difficult to resist this behavior modification. How should we think about it, and what advice would you give for people to pay attention to? And if maybe I'm wrong, so correct me. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. No, you're not wrong. We've all seen the videos of a toddler picking up a book and trying to swipe on the physical pages.
Yeah.
There is a irresistibility for the human person when faced with the proposition of manipulating light with one's hands. And I think that's sort of the primal temptation from the bearer of light, now Lucifer. Practical advice, and frankly, it's such a moving target. There's probably better practical advice than this, but for me, it's just keep screens away from my kids as much as possible. They get a Saturday movie day, but other than that, there's no TV in the house. For me, it's about trying my best to disconnect from the screen when I'm not working and when I'm at home. It's about subsidiarity and forming local communities and families who can be self-sustaining with the smallest number of local people as possible, whether that's farming, homesteading, but developing ways to sustain yourselves and do commerce that's not reliant upon one of these four companies, which is going to get harder and harder and harder. And it's about education. It's about learning first principles and not being afraid to stop and ask the most important questions before you just go off and start building stuff.
Yeah, that's good. No, that's good. I think you said this at the beginning, and I've been thinking about this for lectures I'm preparing. Is in one sense, you early in the conversation, you said one of the things that is going to happen is we're going to have to clarify what does it mean to be a person.
Yeah.
And I think in one sense, this is the challenge of our time is anthropological, as we said, it's metaphysical and eschatological. And the technological society is different from technology. A technological society is a way of seeing the world through technology. Benedict XVI is excellent on this. The Italian philosopher Augusto del Noce is excellent on this. And we have to be able to, I think, make those distinctions. But I also think what we need to do is, I'll often talk about the gospel, the evangelium, the good news, is also the good news about what it means to be a human person. And John Paul II said, this Christian vision of the human person shocked the ancient world, and we've lost it.
Amen.
And I think one of the things that we need to do, it's not very exciting. It's not a technical solution, but I think we have to continually repropose a Christian philosophical vision of the human person, a Christian theology of the person. This is why John Paul's theology of the body is not passé. It's not like, oh, that was the 1990s. No, that it's so absolutely essential, because I think, as I listen to you, that one of the problems is we don't seriously take what it means to be an embodied, embedded person with a rational, a substance with a rational nature and an everlasting destiny. And I think that's, in a sense, where the anthropological battle is, and what we have to continue to push forward. Now, obviously, I have confirmation bias there, because that's what I do a lot, but I do think it's essential.
100% it is. John Paul II's theology of the body is going to be proven to be more and more prescient as the next few years go by. It is a battle for the body, 100%. And I think Catholics have a great opportunity, to quote Pope Leo the Great, and now his namesake is in the chair, but to quote Pope Leo the First, recognize your dignity, O Christian. We have a great opportunity to trumpet and be a champion for what a human in all of his transcendent grandeur is. We are vessels of wonder. We are inexhaustible in dignity. We are created to know, and we are created to be a gift. And all of those things, each of those things, is impossible to replicate by the power of any artifact. We will try, we will counterfeit, but at the end of the day, the church has an opportunity to show a stark alternative to technocracy simply by pointing out what a human being is in all of her grandeur. And I can't wait to see the floodgates open back to the church, because in a world that's just dominated by the chatbot, the machine, where everybody's attempting to reduce you to something transitive, that's going to generate in I think the popular mind, that's going to generate an enormous thirsting for human things. So you're going to see a revival, a renaissance in the fine arts, the humanities, personal conversation. These will become very in demand in the coming years. And the question is, will we have the political, legal, and commercial infrastructure to even permit these activities in the next generation and this one? That's what we should be working for. We should not be, I got to be careful how I say this. If you want to be a Catholic in the fight for AI, don't worry about being a wannabe tech bro. Don't worry about trying to just make a Catholic version of the chatbot. Worry about carving out space for authentically human things in the public square. That's where the fight is right now. That starts with your family. It can be extended to local commerce, internet infrastructure, payment processing.
Banking.
Carve out a
Yep.
place in the public square for humans to be humans. And I promise
Yep.
you that'll be um, not only of great spiritual and cultural benefit, but there's going to be a huge market for it. You'll make
Yep.
a ton of money if
I
that's
think
what you're
this is
into.
well, good. I have a lot of children, so maybe that's what I need to do.
Yeah.
I think this is really important. Thanks for this. I think a couple things just to finish off is this is why commutative justice is very important. It's in the Catholic tradition. That's justice of exchange. We need commercial, legal, and political space, and this is deeply also part of a Christian vision of government. Right? This is
Yep.
not. It's part of our tradition, and I think something we have to talk about. I think the other thing that strikes me and has a couple times. I was in a conversation recently with somebody who helps people get away from trafficking and slavery and various things, and they'll oftentimes be branded. It's quite evil. And I was thinking as talking to this person that St. Paul says you are bought at a price, so glorify God in your body, and that Jesus doesn't brand us; He washes us and He gives us freedom, and that's I think something that's very very important. Our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit. Our bodies are washed clean through baptism, and I think this idea of being bought at a price, that you're not a commodity, and I think this is the source of anxiety. It's the source of desire, and so it's a difficult world out there, and it's difficult for young people. It's difficult for older people. It's tough, but I think we have to just continue with this hope, right? Which is the confident expectation that Jesus will
Amen.
deliver us. And
Amen. If you look at just to extend your point here, what are you worth? Back to this question of the prodigal son. Well, in the eyes of Google, as a Gmail consumer, you're worth like 22 terabytes of data over the course of your life that they can use to sell you things. What are you worth to the eyes of any technocrat? Well, it's always going to be something transitive. But what are you really worth? Everything. It's the
Yep.
very life of God, in all of its glory. It was given for you, and if you were the only one on earth, it would have been given for you alone. That's what you're really worth. And we're just blind. We want to be blind to that for some reason.
Oh, yeah.
But it's really good news. And that's why all this,
It is
it's not scary. It's kind of hopeful, actually. Like there is going to be an awakening. There's going to be a reckoning. I think we have an opportunity to be humans, maybe for the first time in a long time.
And another thing I think is really important, St. Augustine says, don't look to the past as the time was great or the future. Just this is the time you live in. Everybody has enough evil. And so I remember the Tower of Babel. I mean, this is a parallel to the Tower of Babel. It's like every age has its parallel to the Tower of Babel. But my point is that I think that, this is every Christian, every age has to go through different challenges, but they're also in many ways the same. And they are you going to live a fully human life that God gives you, or are you going to go for the counterfeit? And I think that's in a sense, we can calm down a bit and say, okay, like this is our challenge, but it's not as if it never existed before.
That's right. It won't be an easy decision, but it will at least be a very simple decision. It's one with your creator or one with your creature.
Well, I'm really appreciative of your time, John. How about we just finish off very quickly? You told us about Patmos. Do you want to tell us quickly about the Magnus Institute?
Yeah, so I did found a nonprofit a few years ago called the Albertus Magnus Institute, which offers live, interactive, online courses in the great books. So whether you just want to take a literature course with Dr. Anthony Esselin, or if you want to do a 3-year rigorous tour in a cohort through the Trivium and the Quadrivium, you can get that education that's authentically liberating, and it's free. It's as free as it is freeing. So you can check that out at magnusinstitute.org.
So we'll put links up to the Albertus Magnus Institute. Thanks for your time and your insight. I really appreciate it. And I hope we can have more conversations in the future.
I'd love that, Michael. Thank you so much. God bless your work.
All right. All the best. Likewise. Thank you.